Let's call this one increasing or direct. It means that as you look to the right, as you look from left to right, the dots go up. Maybe they go up in a straight line, maybe they go up in a curve, but they go up as you look left to right. You can say that as the independent variable increases, the other variable also increases. So that's why this is called a direct relationship. As the independent variable does one thing, the dependent variable does the same thing. The opposite or indirect relationship occurs when the dots are decreasing, when you look from left to right. That's called indirect because the two variables do opposite things. As one goes up, the other goes down. As one goes down, the other goes up. That's an indirect or decreasing relationship. Now, there is one other shape you might see on the GED, U shape. If you know your math, you might know this is a quadratic or a parabola. But you don't have to know that on the science test. You just have to know that there is a peak and then it goes back down. Or maybe it goes down and there's a minimum and then it goes back up. Lastly, don't forget to consider that there might not be a relationship. You can't just assume that there is a relationship. Sometimes dots are just all over the place and there's no clear relationship. Maybe the scientists didn't set up their experiment correctly, or maybe they tested a hypothesis and the hypothesis is wrong, so there's no relationship. That's not bad. It's not bad science. The whole point of science is to test a hypothesis. Not every hypothesis is true, so it's not a big deal if you do an experiment and it turns out the hypothesis was wrong. You've still learned something. What you've learned is there is no relationship between these variables. This is, by the way, all in the PDF. If you haven't grabbed it yet, please do so. You can always ask Laura in the Q&A to share the PDF link in the chat, as I have done just now as well. This is all in there, so anything you see typed on the screen, you don't need to actually take a screenshot of or write down. It's all there for you to study. Sometimes you may be asked to extrapolate. Extrapolating means that you have to predict something beyond the data. There's also the opposite of extrapolating called interpolating, which is where you make a prediction between the data. Now, there are some things that you can trust on the GED whenever you are asked to extrapolate or interpolate. One is that any trend that you see in the graph will continue in the same way. So you can assume that this red line is going to keep on increasing at the same angle. You can assume that this purple line, which seems to have gone flat, will stay where it is. You can assume that this blue line was going to really shoot up there quite quickly. There's not going to be some sudden, haha, you're wrong, because it went up and then it went down. Like, there's not going to be any of that on the GED. Next, let's discuss a theoretical concept, bias. Bias is prejudice, and it can be for or against something. We often think of bias in a negative way. So you often think of like people being prejudiced against people or things, but bias can be positive as well. So if you think like a certain group of people is really good at tests or a certain group of people is really good at dancing, that would be an example of bias as well, even though it is positive in nature. Scientists are people, so they are not immune to bias. The important thing if you're a scientist is not to pretend that you have no bias, but rather to acknowledge that you do have bias and try to minimize it when you conduct experiments and when you design them. Now, on the GED, what you'll be tested on is possible sources of bias. So let me know in the chat, what can you imagine might be a source of bias in a scientific experiment on the GED? One possibility is what we talked about before with surveys, that the sample is unrepresentative. It might be that you picked people or things outside of the population, or it may be that you picked people from inside the population, but there was bias. You only tested soccer team players when you were trying to draw a conclusion about all high school students. Another possibility is that you don't control necessary variables. For example, I gave an example of this earlier. If I am studying the effect of preparation for the GED on pass rates, but my control group got less sleep than my group that studied, well, now I don't know what caused the test group to do better. Is it because they studied more, or is it just because they were better rested? And of course, some nefarious scientists will actively try to pick groups that will give them the results they want. That has tragically happened in the history of science and led to some misinformation that's still around to this day. And there could be other sources as well. Average is the sum of the numbers divided by the number. Median is the middle value. If there are two middle values, then you average them to get the median. Mode is the most common value, and range is the biggest one minus the smallest one. Now, obviously, that's a lot of math talk, so let's make it clear with an example. Notice that we didn't write everything in the same order. We're going to try to go in order from kind of easiest to hardest, or at least save the most time-consuming one for last. All right, mode. That's the most common value. Which value in this list is the most common value? It's the 1. There are 3 of them, but only 1 or 2 of everything else. So that is the most common one. If there's a tie, everything involved in the tie is the mode. Unless every single number in the list is tied. The most likely example of that would be is if you have 1 of every number. If you have the same number of values for every single value, there is no mode in the list. But that, I've never seen it happen on the GED. Not saying it's impossible, but it's very unlikely. Most likely, there will just be one clear winner, and that will be the mode. Median is the middle number. Now, how do we find the middle number? That's a little bit trickier. Let's skip and do range for a second. What's the biggest minus the smallest in this situation? It's just 9. The biggest number is 9, and the smallest number is 0, and 9 minus 0 is just 9. So that's an easy one. Median. What you're going to do is count to see how many numbers are in the list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. If there's an odd number of values, you're going to have one clear middle value. And the way you can find out where that is by taking the number and dividing by 2. 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. You round up to 8. So if there are 15 things in a line, the 8th thing is the middle thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That 4 is the middle of the list. If you're a little bit fuzzy on that, you can actually reverse engineer it to confirm it. Count the number of numbers to the left of the 4 and to the right of the 4. It should be the same if the 4 is truly in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers to the left of the 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers to the right of the 4. So the 4 is indeed the median. Take a moment here, pause, digest, make sure that makes sense. Some great questions have been coming in the Q&A this whole lesson, but take a moment and ask Laura, our amazing off-camera teacher, now if you have any questions about how we found the mode, the median, or the range. These are all the fundamental things to get from this list before we tackle the calculation-heavy mean. The mean is another word for the average. And the average is the number of values on the bottom of the fraction, the sum of values on the top of the fraction. In this case, we've already found the number of terms. Let me know in the chat, folks, what is the number of values in this list? Indeed, Dion, very nice, Brian and Tristan, it is 15. Now the sum, you'd have to do a little bit of work. So the ones add up to 3. There's a 2. There's 2 3s, which add up to 6. There's a 4, a 5, a 6. The 7s add up to 14. There's an 8, and the 9s add up to 18. And then if you add all of these up, 3 plus 2 plus 6 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 14 plus 8 plus 18, you get the sum, which is 66. There's going to be a calculator on the science test if you need it for a question like this. This would almost certainly be a calculator question. No shame in just putting the numbers in there. Just make sure that you're careful and you don't mistype it. You get the sum, and there it is. It would be 66 over 15. Not a nice round number, but that is the average of this list. And by the way, love, Dion, Cyber 5, you're totally correct. That does come out to 4.4. All right, you will now need the PDF if you don't already have it, because This next bit of mixed practice involves 3 questions. So if you'd be so kind, please find in your PDF this passage. It begins in your PDF on page 24. For this long paragraph and somewhat confusing graph and 3 questions, I'm going to give you 7 minutes. That's 2 minutes per question plus an extra minute to use as you wish. If you'd be so kind, Laura, please give us 7 minutes for questions 6, 7, and 8. Now, the way this is going to work is I'm going to have a poll open for number 6, so you can vote right away on number 6, but you'll need to save your answers for numbers 7 and 8. Give this one a shot, and I'll see you folks in 7 minutes. All right, gang, welcome back. Let's go ahead and review this one. So here we have some text to help us make sense of the graph. Metabolic rates of 7 species. We have body weight and relative metabolic rate. Now let me know in the chat, what's the obvious trend that jumps out at you relating body weight to relative metabolic rate? This is what statisticians might call an inverse correlation. Here we called it a decreasing or an indirect relationship. Notice how as the body weight goes up, the metabolic rate goes down. Now, it doesn't go down linearly. It goes down real quick, and then it kind of levels off. So a horse is a bit slower than a human, but not that much slower, whereas a cactus mouse is a lot slower than a shrew. So there is a change in the rate as the body weight increases, but still, this is a decreasing relationship. Very nicely done, Debbie. Exactly. Irma, very nice. Roland as well. Okay, we've got the gist of the data. We've got the obvious trend. It's time to go hunting. The first question was a data analysis question. Stats. What has the median body weight? You folks crushed it. Really nice job voting in this custom poll. It was the rabbit. You can tell the rabbit is the median because there are 7 things. 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. Round it up to 4. The 4th thing is the median. That's the rabbit. It has 3 things left of it, 3 things right of it. It's the middle. Pause here, digest, make sure that makes sense. If you did not know why 6 was rabbit, this is a good time to ask our amazing off-camera teacher, Laura, in the Q&A. All right, let's take a look at this drop-down question, which is basically a multiple choice question, which is why we can use the poll. Go ahead and vote for the one you selected on number 7. Nicely done here, folks. So the test makers are asking, what's going to happen if we calculate the average after taking out the shrew? Well, the shrew is the smallest one. So if you take out the smallest number, what's going to happen? It's going to get lower. Very nicely done here, folks. I beg your pardon. We are going to see that the addition of the shrew, or that the removal of the shrew lowers the metabolic rate. I beg your pardon, I said that incorrectly. The shrew has the highest metabolic rate and the lowest body weight. We're talking about metabolic rate, shrews is the highest. If you have a list of numbers and you take out the biggest one, that will cause the average to get smaller. Now, some important trap answers on this one. D says impossible to predict. Watch out for this trap. If you're reading a question on the GED and you can't figure it out, don't pick choice D. In fact, pick any choice other than D, because it's probably a trap. Do not ever say, well, I can't figure it out. Maybe it's because it's impossible to... No, it's a trap. Don't pick that choice. I'm not saying this can never be correct, but the only time you should ever pick this is if you have a clear reason for picking it, other than I just can't figure it out, so I'm hoping nobody can. A was our other more popular trap. The thing is that if we're talking about body weight, A would be correct. But we are talking about the metabolic rate. So for this, you're only considering the y-axis, not the x-axis. So this is a case where you just got to be really careful to read the question. I know I said earlier you're not there to read on test day, but for the question itself, you should read it. Passages in the reading test, science test, you should read them. It's always important to read the passage that you're given, make sure you understand the question, whether you have to read all the choices or not. That depends on how the question is going. But folks, you absolutely smashed this one. Really, really nicely done. Dodging some traps or falling for them so you can learn how to not fall for them on test day. All right, here we had an extrapolation question. Give this one a shot and let me know what you think. The relationship here we said was as weight increases, metabolic rate decreases. We had a decreasing or an indirect relationship. So if adult elephants weigh more than horses, their metabolic rate should be less than that of horses. That's an indirect relationship. If the word more happens here with one variable, the word lower should be happen with the other variable. And that's why the answer is C for champions. Now, choice B is really tempting because it's not really changing a whole lot, so it would be pretty close to a horse. But remember, on the GED, always assume that the pattern continues beyond the graph. It's not continuing by much, but it is a decreasing pattern, so you should say, well, it's decreasing if I go heavier than horses. And then choice D, this one's backwards. If their body weight is higher, then their metabolic rate must be lower, not higher, because this is an indirect or an opposite relationship. So we're going to grab C for champions here and move on with the GED.